Imagine a door that nobody has touched in nearly half a century. Not a single person. Not cleaners, not family members, not the most devoted fans on earth. Just a door, sitting at the top of a narrow staircase, holding its breath in the dark. That door existed at Graceland, the Memphis mansion where Elvis Presley lived, performed, laughed, suffered, and ultimately died. And for 48 years, that door stayed shut. People walked through Graceland by the millions. They admired the gold records and the glittering costumes. They stood beside his grave in the quiet meditation garden. They peered through velvet ropes at rooms frozen in 1977. But no one went upstairs. No one climbed those stairs to that attic. Tour guides would deflect with the same polished answer every time: the upper floor was off limits out of respect for the family. That was always the explanation. Neat, simple, and just vague enough to leave everyone wondering. Because when you stop and think about it, what could possibly need protecting for almost 50 years? What kind of secret takes that long to guard? When the attic door finally opened in early 2025, the people inside weren't reporters or celebrities or government officials. They were archivists wearing white cotton gloves, moving slowly and carefully through a space that felt less like a storage room and more like a message left behind by a man who knew his time was running out. What they found didn't just change how people see Elvis Presley. It changed what it even means to know someone famous. But before we get to what was inside that attic, we need to understand why it was locked in the first place. And to do that, we have to go back to the very beginning. Elvis Presley bought Graceland in the spring of 1957. He was 22 years old, already famous beyond measure, and desperately searching for something that felt like home. The property sat on the southern edge of Memphis, a grand white colonial house with columns, surrounded by almost 14 acres of land. He paid just over $12,000 for it, which sounds like nothing now but was still a serious sum for a young man who had grown up in poverty in Tupelo, Mississippi. Elvis didn't just move into Graceland. He absorbed it. He shaped it in his own image, part movie star fantasy, part southern boy dream. The jungle room, with its shaggy green carpet climbing the walls and its tiki-style wooden furniture, looked like something out of a fever dream. The basement had 3 television screens mounted side by side, so Elvis could watch multiple channels at the same time. That was an almost unimaginable luxury in the 1960s. The living room had stained glass peacocks that caught the afternoon light and threw colors across the ceiling. Outside, there were horses in the fields, peacocks wandering the grounds, and at one particularly chaotic point in history, a chimpanzee named Scatter who had a habit of pulling at ladies' clothing and stealing drinks from unsuspecting guests. Elvis apparently found this hilarious. The staff had a different opinion. But Graceland wasn't just excess and spectacle. There were quiet corners too. In 1964, Elvis built his meditation garden, a private sanctuary with fountains, flowers, and circular columns. He would go there alone to think. Not the performing Elvis, not the swiveling hip Elvis, not the gold suit Elvis, just a man sitting in a garden, trying to make sense of a life that had gotten very, very complicated. Those two sides of Graceland, the wild showmanship and the private searching, tell you everything you need to know about the man who lived there. August 16, 1977 started as an ordinary afternoon at Graceland. The curtains were drawn against the Tennessee heat. Elvis had been up through much of the night, as he often was in those years, and was resting in his bedroom. His girlfriend, Ginger Alden, woke up sometime around 2 in the afternoon. Elvis wasn't in bed. She assumed he had gotten up on his own. But the house had a certain quality of silence that felt wrong. When nobody had seen or heard from Elvis by mid-afternoon, Ginger checked the bathroom. What she found there ended an era. Elvis had collapsed on the floor. He was 42 years old. By the time paramedics rushed him to Baptist Memorial Hospital, there was nothing anyone could do. He was pronounced dead at 3:30 in the afternoon. The news spread through the world like a shockwave. Radio stations broke from their regular programming. Television anchors struggled to keep their composure. Flowers appeared at the gates of Graceland within hours, piling up higher and higher as the days passed. Nearly 100,000 people came to Memphis in the days following his death, lining the streets, crying openly, unable to accept that he was gone. The funeral procession was 17 white Cadillacs long. James Brown was there. Sammy Davis Jr. was there. A 9-year-old girl named Lisa Marie Presley was there, clinging to the reality that her father was really gone. Elvis was buried at Forest Hill Cemetery, next to his mother Gladys, who had died 19 years earlier. For one brief moment, it seemed like it might be over. Like Elvis Presley could finally be at rest. That peace lasted exactly 2 days. In the dark early hours after Elvis's burial, a group of men crept into Forest Hill Cemetery with tools and intent. They had come to take Elvis's body. Whether for ransom, for notoriety, or for something even stranger, nobody ever fully explained. They didn't succeed. Security caught them before they could do more than damage part of the structure. But the attempt shook Vernon Presley, Elvis's father, who had just buried his only son, to his core. Vernon made a decision quickly. Working with local authorities and moving under the cover of night, he had both Elvis and Gladys relocated. Their new resting place would be the meditation garden at Graceland, the private sanctuary Elvis had built for himself all those years ago. The place where he used to go to find quiet. It seemed right. It also meant that Graceland itself had now become a burial ground, a memorial, and a family home all at once. Vernon didn't stop there. He installed new security systems. He hired round-the-clock guards. And he sealed off the entire upper floor of the mansion, including the attic above it. The official statement was about respect and privacy. The actual reason may have been something deeper, a father's grief transformed into an instinct to protect whatever remained of his son. When Graceland opened to the public in 1982, a year after Vernon himself had passed away, visitors could tour the ground floor. They could stand where Elvis stood. They could see the outfits and the guitars and the gold records. But the staircase was blocked with a velvet rope. The rooms above were silent. And they stayed that way for more than 4 decades. The official cause of death, delivered by medical examiner Dr. Jerry Francisco on the evening of August 16, 1977, was cardiac arrhythmia. Heart failure. Natural causes. He said it quickly, clearly, and moved on. But journalists, researchers, and Elvis's own inner circle knew that something was being left out. The autopsy told a more complicated story. The toxicology results, which emerged over the following months, showed that Elvis's system had contained dangerously high levels of multiple prescription medications at the time of his death. We're talking about a cocktail of sedatives, painkillers, and stimulants, drugs that, taken together, would put enormous strain on any human heart. The man most directly connected to this was Dr. George Nichopoulos, known to everyone around Elvis simply as Dr. Nick. He had been Elvis's personal physician for a full decade before that August afternoon. And during the final 8 months of Elvis's life, from January to August 1977, Dr. Nick had written prescriptions for more than 10,000 pills. Not over several years. In 8 months. That works out to roughly 1 prescription every 36 hours. When Dr. Nick was eventually questioned about this, his defense was unusual. He claimed he had been trying to protect Elvis by managing his access to medications. If Elvis couldn't get what he needed from a trusted doctor, the argument went, he would simply find another source, possibly something far more dangerous. Dr. Nick framed himself as a harm reduction specialist working in impossible conditions. Not everyone was convinced. In 1980, Dr. Nichopoulos faced 14 charges related to overprescribing medications, not only to Elvis but to other patients as well. A jury acquitted him. But the Tennessee Board of Medical Examiners kept digging, and in 1995, 18 years after Elvis died, they permanently revoked his medical license. The conclusion seemed clear, even if no courtroom ever said so outright. Then in 2020, another layer was added to the story. A writer named Sally Hodel published a book arguing that Elvis had carried a serious genetic condition his entire life, something called alpha-1 antitrypsin deficiency, which affects the lungs and liver. If her research is right, then Elvis was never simply a man who made bad choices. He was a genuinely ill person navigating a medical landscape that barely understood his conditions, surrounded by people who were either unable or unwilling to truly help him. The truth about Elvis's death is probably a combination of all these things: genetic vulnerability, chronic pain, a system designed to keep a performer performing rather than to keep a human being healthy. And that truth was part of what was quietly sitting in the sealed rooms above Graceland for all those years. Think about what 48 years actually means. Children born after Elvis died grew up, had children of their own, and those children grew up too. The music world transformed multiple times. The internet was invented. Smartphones became a universal object. Moon landings, pandemics, entire geopolitical shifts. And through all of it, that attic door at Graceland stayed closed. Tourists standing in the mansion would sometimes look up at the ceiling, knowing there were floors above them they could never reach. Some would ask the tour guides directly. The guides would smile and repeat the same answer they had always given. Out of respect for the family. Move along, please. Fan theories filled the gap. Some were harmless, some were elaborate. The most famous was the idea that Elvis had never died at all, that the whole thing had been staged, that he was living quietly somewhere under an assumed name. People pointed to inconsistencies in the funeral arrangements. They noted that his middle name was engraved as Aaron on the gravestone when it had always been spelled Aaron. They found a man at the Memphis airport on the day of Elvis's death who reportedly bought a one-way ticket to Buenos Aires and bore a striking resemblance to the king. These theories never fully went away. The internet gave them new life. Entire communities built themselves around the conviction that Elvis was still out there. In one sense, this was a testament to how deeply people loved him. The grief was simply too large to accept. But in another sense, the wild speculation allowed real questions to go unanswered. The mystery of the locked attic fed the conspiracy theories, and the conspiracy theories fed the mystery. Meanwhile, Lisa Marie Presley, Elvis's daughter, the 9-year-old at his funeral, grew up inside that mystery. She knew what was in the attic. She had made a choice, long ago, to honor her father's evident wish to keep it private. She spent her adult life managing the estate, protecting the legacy, and carrying the weight of being Elvis Presley's child in a world that never stopped being obsessed with him. When Lisa Marie died in January 2023, the responsibility passed to her daughter, Riley Keough. And Riley made a different choice. Before the attic could be opened, there was a crisis. In the spring of 2024, a company called Norsany Investments and Private Lending LLC filed legal papers in Tennessee with a stunning claim. Riley Keough, they said, had defaulted on a loan of nearly $4 million, and as a result, Graceland itself would be auctioned off to pay the debt. The Elvis fan community erupted. Social media pages dedicated to preserving his legacy went into full panic mode. The idea that Graceland, the actual house, the actual gardens, the graves of Elvis and Gladys, could end up in the hands of an unknown investment company felt apocalyptic to millions of people around the world. Riley's legal team moved fast. They went to court in Shelby County and filed an emergency motion to stop the auction. Their argument was direct: the entire thing was fabricated. Riley had never borrowed money from this company. The signatures on the loan documents appeared to have been forged. Someone had constructed a false legal claim specifically designed to steal one of the most famous properties in American history. The auction date came and went. And crucially, nobody from Norsany Investments showed up in court to defend their claim. The judge granted the emergency motion and declared the sale void. He called Graceland a singular cultural landmark whose loss would cause irreparable damage to the public interest. Graceland remained exactly where it belonged, in the hands of the Presley family. The incident, strange and unsettling as it was, may have accelerated what came next. With the future of Graceland's ownership settled and secured, Riley Keough made the announcement that nobody had quite expected. The attic would be opened. Not to the public, not yet, but to a team of professional archivists who would carefully document everything inside. It was January 2025, cold and still, when a small team of archivists arrived at Graceland. They wore white cotton gloves and carried cameras and cataloging equipment. They climbed the narrow staircase that had been off-limits since the summer of 1977. At the top, there was a door. Old. Heavy. Fitted with a brass lock that had not been turned in 48 years. The lead archivist used a key that had been kept in the Presley family's possession since Elvis died. The lock turned. The door opened. And what they found inside was not what anyone expected. It was not chaos. It was not clutter. It was not the random accumulation of junk that tends to fill most attics over the decades. What they found was order. Careful, deliberate, deeply personal order. The attic stretched across the full width of the mansion's top floor. The windows were covered with blackout curtains, the same ones that had been in place since 1977. A small air conditioning unit hummed in one corner. Remarkably, it had been maintained from outside, by the Graceland maintenance staff, all these years, without anyone ever opening the door to check on it. The room was cool and dry. Almost everything inside had been preserved without any deliberate preservation effort. Along one wall stood rows of cardboard and wooden boxes, each one labeled in handwriting that archivists immediately recognized as Elvis's own. The labels were specific and organized: Tupelo 1945. First recordings. Army Days. Hollywood. Vegas. And at the end of the row, one box with no section title, just a date. After 1977. The year he died. Whoever had arranged this space, and all evidence pointed to Elvis himself, had done it with intention. This was not a man throwing memories into storage. This was a man building an archive of his own life, for reasons he may have taken to his grave. The archivists worked slowly and methodically, photographing and cataloguing every object before touching it. Some items stopped them in their tracks. In the section marked Tupelo, they found a small stuffed bear. It was old, worn nearly to nothing, one eye missing, its body repaired repeatedly with patches of mismatched fabric. Family records later confirmed what anyone who knew Elvis's history might have guessed. This was the toy he had kept as a small child in Tupelo, Mississippi, during the years when his family had almost nothing. The patches, researchers noted, appeared to have been cut from women's clothing, likely his mother Gladys's dresses, used to hold the toy together when there was no money for a new one. Elvis Presley had held on to that toy for his entire life. Through the fame and the fortune and the jumpsuits and the sold-out arenas and the Hollywood films, that patched-up, one-eyed bear had made it to the attic at Graceland. In the Army Days section, they found a Bible. The spine was held together with electrical tape, repaired and re-repaired over years of use. Inside the front cover was a handwritten inscription from Gladys Presley, written when Elvis was drafted in 1958. She told him to keep his faith, to stay close to God, to remember where he came from. Throughout the pages, in Elvis's handwriting, were underlines and margin notes and small personal prayers. The final entry, they discovered, was dated just days before he died. He had marked Psalm 23, the psalm that begins with the phrase, "The Lord is my shepherd." The Hollywood section contained a leather jacket made for one of his early films. Inside one pocket was a small slip of paper in his handwriting, "Wear this when you need to disappear." The jacket was not a costume piece kept for sentimental reasons. It was a disguise. Elvis Presley had worn it when he wanted to move through the world without being seen. There were stacks of books on Eastern religion and philosophy, heavily annotated. Pages marked with questions he had written to himself, the kind of questions a man asks when he is searching for something that fame cannot provide. There were handwritten lyrics on hotel notepaper, napkins, and loose notebook pages. Alternate versions of famous songs, lines that never made the final recordings, small private jokes to himself in the margins. And then there was the box of fan letters, still sealed. Never opened. Hundreds of them, their envelopes yellowed with age. Letters from soldiers. From grieving families. From young musicians who had been inspired by him. One letter, postmarked 1976, apparently urged Elvis to slow down, to take care of his health, to rest. The archivists could read this much from the visible text on the outside of the envelope where the ink had bled through the paper over the decades. That letter was never opened. Whatever it said in full, whatever someone had cared enough to write to Elvis about his own well-being, he had never read it. Perhaps the most quietly devastating discovery was a collection of reel-to-reel audio tapes. They were labeled plainly, "Practice Sessions, 1976." These were not recordings anyone had ever heard. They were not destined for release. They were Elvis in a room by himself, working through music that no one was ever supposed to hear. What the archivists heard when they played the tapes was a man still experimenting. Still curious. Still searching for something new. He was mixing gospel with blues, playing with unusual chord structures, trying out a more stripped-down sound than anything he had released publicly. There were false starts and restarts. Moments of laughter at his own mistakes. Long silences where he seemed to be listening to something only he could hear. And then, recorded in the final months of his life, there was a version of Unchained Melody performed completely alone. No band. No orchestra. No arrangement of any kind. Just his voice, unaccompanied, in a room. His voice was not the polished instrument of his peak years. It wavered. It cracked. It carried the weight of a body that was failing. But it was alive in a way that polish cannot manufacture. Music experts who later listened to this recording described it as profoundly moving, not because it was technically accomplished, but because it felt like truth. Like a man singing to himself about longing and loss with no audience to perform for, no image to maintain, no persona to inhabit. Just a person and a song and whatever was left of his voice. A medical document was also found in the Vegas section of the attic. It was dated 1974 and marked confidential. The family has not released its full contents, but the cover page reportedly referenced heart disease and recommended significant lifestyle changes. Elvis kept performing for 3 more years after that document was written. He kept taking the medications. He kept up the schedules that were slowly destroying him. Whether that was Elvis's choice, or whether the system around him made it nearly impossible to choose otherwise, is a question that doesn't have a clean answer. The people who managed his career had enormous financial incentives for him to keep touring. The doctor who managed his health had developed a complicated and ultimately fatal approach to keeping him functional. And Elvis himself, by all accounts, was both deeply aware of his own deterioration and unable or unwilling to stop the machine that his life had become. What the attic revealed was not a man who had made peace with that. It revealed a man who had quietly, privately, been trying to make sense of his own life, archiving it, annotating it, keeping the patches on the bear and the underlines in the Bible and the alternate lyrics on the hotel napkins. A man who wanted something to remain after he was gone that was more honest than the rhinestone suits and the official photographs. Riley Keough, in making the decision to open the attic and document its contents, gave that quiet private man a chance to be seen. Not the icon. Not the conspiracy theory. Not the tragedy. Just Elvis Presley, a boy from Tupelo who became something enormous and spent his whole life trying to hold on to who he had been before any of it happened. In 2018, long after his death, Elvis Presley was awarded the Presidential Medal of Freedom. It was a formal recognition of what most people already knew, that his influence on American music, culture, and identity is essentially incalculable. Without Elvis, the shape of rock and roll is different. Without Elvis, the cultural conversation of the 20th century runs along different lines. But the attic at Graceland suggested that Elvis himself understood his legacy differently. He didn't leave behind a manifesto or a statement. He left behind a teddy bear with his mother's fabric stitched into its chest. He left behind a Bible he had read until the binding fell apart. He left behind a song, recorded alone, that nobody was ever supposed to hear. The mystery of the locked attic wasn't really about secrets. It wasn't about hiding the truth of his death, or protecting a scandal, or guarding some explosive revelation. The mystery was about something simpler and stranger. It was about a man who had given so much of himself to the public that the only thing he had left that was truly his were the things nobody could see. For 48 years, the door stayed closed. And what it was protecting, in the end, wasn't a secret. It was a person. If this story moved you the way it moved us, we'd love to hear your thoughts down in the comments. What surprised you most about what was found in that attic? And if you want to keep exploring the untold stories behind history's biggest moments, make sure you subscribe. We have a lot more where this came from. See you in the next one.